Being a tanker at any time in history was a dangerous and terrifying job in itself. Now, imagine adding gallons of flammable mixture inside your armor as you're ordered to attack a position that regular weapons cannot destroy. You're the main target on the battlefield, and all it would take to make your worst fear come true is one hit in the wrong spot, setting everything ablaze in an instant. And yes, on top of that, you have a range of only about 100 yards, and the enemy knows exactly what will happen to them if they let you get close. This was the job and life of a crew member of a flamethrower tank, and today you're going to see why it was worse than you might think. The effectiveness of flamethrowers was first realized in the trenches of the First World War, but the dangers and unreliability of early man-operated flamethrowers often caused more problems than benefits. In the Second World War, both tanks and flamethrowers were improved, and then someone had the idea to combine the two to solve the issues with man-operated flamethrowers. The tank improved the terrifying 90% casualty rate of man-operated flamethrowers and could carry significantly more fuel, unlike a soldier who struggled with his 80-pound flamethrower on his back, which only gave him about 10 seconds of fire at an effective range of just 20 to 40 yards. By mounting flamethrowers on tanks, military engineers found a way to increase the range, power, and survivability of flamethrower operators, providing a new, terrifying tool for breaching enemy defenses. It's interesting how well-made bunkers could withstand even the heaviest artillery or aerial bombardments. However, flamethrowers could clear otherwise impenetrable bunkers, caves, and trenches with a stream of fire that had devastating effects. But everything comes at a cost. The first known flamethrower tanks were developed in the Second World War by the British and the Germans. The British first mounted flamethrowers on the Bren carriers and later moved to light and then heavy tanks. The Germans initially used flamethrower tanks in their invasion of the Soviet Union, but with inconclusive results, and most of them were converted back to standard tanks. They even experimented with adding flamethrowers to the Stug assault gun, but met with the same limited success. These early models were limited in range and effectiveness, but showed the potential of a flame-throwing armored vehicle. After many prototypes, it can be said that the British Churchill Crocodile was perhaps the best flamethrower tank of the Second World War. It had a range of over 150 feet and immediately demonstrated its power during the Normandy invasion and the push towards Germany. Although slow, the Churchill was well protected and its fuel was stored relatively safely in a 6-ton armored trailer towed behind the tank. The trailer held around 135 gallons of thickened fuel and was connected to the tank through an armored pipe, allowing the fuel to be pumped into the flamethrower without risking an onboard explosion. Although this setup greatly improved safety, an explosion of the trailer could still easily endanger the tank crew in front of it. Tanks in the Second World War were not airtight, and the sticky, flammable liquid could drip inside onto the crew or set off ammunition, or even disable the engine. Additionally, the fire would consume all the oxygen around the tank, so even if the crew wasn't directly hit, they would be in great danger. Nonetheless, the Churchill Crocodile was greatly feared by the Germans, and for good reason. It cleared many fortifications throughout Europe. Another famous flamethrower tank model from World War II is the M4 Sherman Zippo, used by American forces, especially in the Pacific Theater. Unlike the Churchill Crocodile, the Zippo's flamethrower system was integrated directly into the tank. This setup allowed for better maneuverability, but the crew sat right beside the fuel and ammunition, meaning just one spark in the wrong place could be catastrophic. The Zippo had slightly less range than the Churchill, but was highly effective against well-fortified Japanese pillboxes in the deadly Pacific island hopping campaign. The main challenge for a crew was that they were always assigned to spearhead direct assaults on heavily defended positions. That was their job. Their typical range was less than 150 meters, making them virtually useless on an open battlefield. While they had support and protection from other standard tanks and infantry, they had to come dangerously close to enemy positions to be effective. And of course, the enemy knew this all too well. You wouldn't want a flamethrower tank spraying a stream of fire into your bunker, so entire enemy fronts would open fire on the flame tanks. Just as approaching flame tanks terrified the enemy waiting in bunkers, the crews inside knew that as soon as they released their first stream of fire, everyone would focus solely on them. The Zippo tanks proved extremely effective in the Pacific, where Japanese defenders on the front line had few ways to disable tanks from a distance. Often they would charge at close range toward advancing Allied tanks, only to find out one of them was a flamethrower. Armies tried to disguise flame tanks as much as possible to make them indistinguishable from standard tanks. The flamethrower was usually mounted in place of the main gun, and from the outside, it was hard to tell it apart from a regular tank. However, once the first stream of fire was released, the cover was blown. The immense noise, flames, and thick black smoke made them visible from far away. Besides the fact that everyone was targeting them, flamethrower tanks led the column and had the highest chances of driving over mines or hitting anti-tank traps. Remember, you're carrying gallons of fuel inside your tank, so running over a mine or having your armor penetrated likely means the end, in possibly the worst way imaginable. Even an external, non-penetrating hit could ignite the fuel inside. If the tank got stuck, broke down, or if the crew tried to escape and was captured, they couldn't expect humane treatment. Flamethrower tankers were almost always executed upon capture if they were lucky enough for it to be quick, rather than facing revenge from forces who had endured the horrors of their weapon. British flamethrower tank crews, for example, received slightly higher pay due to this risk. If everything went your way and you completed your mission successfully at the close range you operated, you would definitely see, hear, and smell the results of your fire, and we can't describe that here without the video being censored. Many crew members later expressed a strong sense of guilt for the suffering their weapon caused. Once the war was over, soldiers were left to carry those memories for the rest of their lives. On the enemy side, just seeing a flamethrower tank ranging its shots was often enough to cause complete panic, forcing them to abandon their position or surrender. US forces stated that flamethrower tanks were the best weapon they had for taking Iwo Jima, and infantry loved having them by their side. Since there weren't many flamethrower tanks available, they were pooled and dispatched directly from refueling stations to the battles where they were urgently needed, so their crews saw a lot of intense close combat. As for the tank's interior, it was even more cramped than a standard tank because of all the additional fuel lines, controls, and the flamethrower mechanism, which took up extra space. In some models, the turret couldn't rotate more than 180 degrees due to the flamethrower apparatus inside, and the crew had to perform maintenance extremely carefully to avoid any incidents. However, throughout World War II, flamethrower tanks had mixed results, partly due to improved infantry anti-tank weapons and the increase in their range and effectiveness. At the beginning of the war, infantry had a chance to disable a tank only at about 30 to 50 meters, but with the introduction of the bazooka, Panzerfaust, and Piat, infantry had a much better chance to disable tanks before they reached the flamethrower's range. After World War II, despite their devastating impact, flamethrower tanks stayed in service. US forces brought a few variants, like the Zippo, to the Korean War, but they saw limited use due to the difficult mountainous terrain, and aircraft-delivered napalm bombs mostly took over their role. However, the Vietnam War, with its entirely different landscape, brought flamethrower tanks back into the spotlight. The M67 Zippo, a flame version of the M48 Patton tank, proved devastating in search and destroy missions. It was well armored, had an improved flamethrower, and could destroy the hideouts and tunnel systems of Vietnam's guerrilla army. In the dense jungles, they were also effective for targeting unseen enemies at close proximity and breaking ambushes. During the Vietnam War, the public became fully aware of just how horrifying this weapon was, as well as many others used during the conflict, and strong pressure began to build to ban such types of weapons. After the Vietnam War, both infantry and tank flamethrowers gradually disappeared from the arsenal of modern armies, but even today they appear in some isolated engagements. With today's advanced anti-tank technology, it is almost impossible to operate a flamethrower tank without sentencing its crew and everyone around them to a death sentence. Nevertheless, flamethrower tanks remain a symbol of how far humans will go to destroy each other, regardless of the cause.